This episode of the EV Resource Podcast is brought to you by Titan Auto and Tire. Titan has some of the very few independent auto repair shops in Central Virginia that are qualified to work on EVs and hybrids. And from hybrids to Hummers, they fix everything. For more information and to schedule an appointment for your vehicle, go to TitanAutoTire.com. Coming up this week, GM is going to launch Corvette as its own brand. BYD looks to sell EVs in Mexico. A ton of Tesla news and much more. Well, hello, friends, and welcome to episode 132 of the EV Resource Podcast. I'm Zach Hurst, and each week I bring you the latest EV news, information, and interviews with industry experts. Before we dive into the news stories I have lined up for you this week, I want to thank all of you so genuinely, deeply from the bottom of my heart, all of you who reached out with your support. Last Monday, if you haven't heard yet, a week ago from today, actually, one of our family cats passed away very unexpectedly and suddenly. And I didn't think I was going to get choked up talking about it, but needless to say that it has had quite an effect on all of us. And as a result, I took the week and decided to just take some time to process that and spend more time with the kids. So if you're wondering why I skipped the podcast last week and haven't published the magazine yet, that would be why. Artemis was one of 3 cats that we had, and we actually rescued her and her brother 2 years ago from being stray cats outside. And it's been hard on us. It really has. So with regards to the magazine specifically, I did decide to combine the November and December issues together as one and should be finished with that soon. I know I keep it seems like every podcast episode I keep saying I'm going to finish it soon. But I wanted to record the podcast tonight instead of working on the magazine, and it's only me, so there's only so much I can do with the time. But what that means is that if you haven't signed up to receive the magazine in your email, you still have time to do that. It's completely free. I know I don't mention that often. It's free, 100%, and has exclusive content that you are not going to find anywhere else. This double issue especially is one that I don't want you to miss. So head over to the webpage. It's ev-resource.com/magazine, and you can sign up using the form on the page. And while we're on the subject of signing up for things, don't forget to subscribe and or follow this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it. And if you would, take a minute to leave a review. That helps other people find it as well. And chances are, if you like it, other people will too. Okay, so let's get on to the news. Our first story is a bit of a celebration for Ford. Citing third-party data, the company said that they have achieved CEO Jim Farley's goal of becoming the second best-selling automaker of electric vehicles here in the United States. Ford has recently taken over the number 2 spot just ahead of the Hyundai Motor Group, growing their EV market share to 7.4% through November of this year, up from 5.7% last year at the same time. Ford reported sales of 53,752 EVs in the U.S., and that includes the Mustang Mach-E, F-150 Lightning pickup truck, and E-Transit delivery vans. For context, Hyundai's sales do not include the Nexo hydrogen fuel cell EV, to Ford's advantage, because if that vehicle were included in the numbers, then they would have beaten out Ford by a few hundred units. The sales numbers come after Hyundai lost the $7,500 tax credit earlier this year, while Ford has still qualified. And remember, though the majority of the tax credit doesn't take effect until January 1st, the disqualification of non-US built EVs was an immediate effect, and that definitely hurt Hyundai's numbers. Now, I'm sure you're not questioning who is at the number 1 spot. Of course, that top spot goes to Tesla, who still dominates the EV market with more than 908,000 EVs sold through the end of September. Ford may not live long at that number 2 position, though. GM and their massive EV plans for next year will certainly prove to be quite the challenge if they can actually build all the new EVs they've been talking about. Through the end of the third quarter this year, GM has sold less than 23,000 EVs, So they've got a big game of catch up to play. It will certainly be interesting to see how 2023 plays out, and I'm hoping that the battle for second place gets hot. That would only benefit all of us. Next, GM has announced that they are going to launch a new sub-brand using the Corvette nameplate. Similar to what we've seen other manufacturers do, GM has plans to make a high-performance crossover with the Corvette name. A four-door coupe and a two-seater Corvette EV are also in the works to round out the offerings from the company. Sports cars are useful image builders and sometimes very profitable. But as Porsche proved in the early 2000s with the Cayenne SUV, there's a lot of profit to be made stretching the brand into other vehicle segments. Played intelligently and with authenticity, the name Corvette should be a license to print money. At a point in time when Ferrari and Maserati and Porsche are all offering one or more SUVs, why shouldn't Corvette also consider building sedans and crossovers? According to someone inside the GM Tech Center, they said, quote, Corvette is not just a brand. It's a constantly evolving system paired with a dramatically different user experience. The aim is not to beat Taycan or Cayenne at their own game, but to create three American legends capable of breaking new ground by making the essence of Corvette scalable, end quote. So another great icon of American sports car history is getting fat and following in the footsteps of so many other iconic names. Personally, I'm happy that we're going to have more EVs, but to use the Corvette name in this way, I'm not so sure. It is, understandably, a very, very controversial topic, and for that reason, it's going to be this week's question of the week. So is this a good move for GM and Corvette? Head over to the Patreon site, which is patreon.com/EVresource, and let your voice be heard. You do not have to be a current Patreon supporter to vote in the poll or comment, and I want to hear what you think. All right, next, Reuters reports that BYD is looking to sell EVs in Mexico next year and aims to grow sales to more than 30,000 units in 2024. Next year, BYD will begin selling fully electric versions of its Tang sport utility vehicle alongside its Han sedan through 8 dealers across Mexico. The world's largest EV maker by sales hopes to sell 10,000 vehicles in Mexico next year and between 20 and 30,000 in 2024, with the company's long-term goal set to reach around 10% of total market share. While BYD declined to name the intended starting price of its vehicles in Mexico, they have stressed the company's affordability. But affordability can be somewhat of a relative term. In September, BYD had set pre-sale prices for its Tang and Han models at $72,500 for the European market. And considering that very few Mexicans make more than even $10,000 a year, according to the country's statistics agency, it's uncertain how well BYD will do in this new country. And I do want to backtrack a little bit and touch on the world's largest EV maker by sales part of that reporting. I didn't announce it on the podcast when it happened, but BYD had reportedly dethroned Tesla as the world's largest EV maker earlier in the second quarter of this year and have been extending their lead ever since. So what is making them so successful? Well, the internal combustion engine. And this is why it's important to be very careful of what you read and listen to. It's also why I didn't bother sharing it before, but maybe I should have for some clarity. Yes, BYD has sold more EVs than Tesla this year, but they aren't full battery electric vehicles. Almost half of them are plug-in hybrids. And yes, while I do consider plug-in hybrids to be electric vehicles, I think it's important to add some more context when looking at the situation. So if you see that BYD is number 1 in the world and Tesla is number 2, just know that that's because of plug-in hybrids and not necessarily full battery electric vehicles. So will BYD see further success as they move into other markets around the world? I certainly hope so, but I don't know enough about the Mexican auto market to really kind of have a prediction on this one. It is definitely a blind spot for me. I know many EVs are made in Mexico, but I know next to nothing about actually how many are sold. Next, CharIN, the Charging Interface Initiative organization, issued an official response to Tesla's renaming of the Tesla connector to the North American Charging Standard. In a release dated November 29th, they said the following, quote, CharIN applauds Tesla for including DIN 70121 and ISO 15118-02 communication standards for the NACS protocol. That's basically the technical terms for Tesla's plug. They continue, we also appreciate Tesla's effort to move the e-mobility market forward even faster than it is moving now. However, we encourage stakeholders to investigate ways to focus on market acceleration rather than the creation of yet another form factor alternative, which will lead to further consumer confusion and delay EV adoption. CCS has gone through many years of rigorous standardization processes, which is a required activity for any new standard proposal. After a decade of collaborative work, the domestic and international EV industry has aligned around CCS, end quote. They do go on to say in the statement that nearly 300 members of the organization are using or investing in CCS, and that here in North America, there are more CCS plugs than Tesla superchargers and more than 10 times the number of J1772 plugs than there are Tesla destination chargers. The statement goes on to say, quote, we strongly encourage Tesla as a CharIN member to work with CharIN's membership base, the standards organizations, and others to accelerate the adoption of a fully interoperable EV charging solution to transition to electric vehicles more quickly, end quote. So this was coming, wasn't it? I mean, this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. At this point, I think the only thing that'll work in Tesla's favor here would be for a major automaker to adopt the Tesla plug for their vehicles. Assuming, of course, that that automaker could then have access to the supercharger network. While I don't see Ford or GM making such a move, as they already have invested a lot in CCS, they have a lot of vehicles on the road using CCS, and actually GM was the very first company to adopt the CCS charging standard here in North America. So if we did see anybody using the Tesla plug, it would have to be a company that really hasn't started making EVs yet. And I think Stellantis would certainly fit the bill. They are the makers of Dodge, Chrysler, Jeep, Fiat, and more brands. And if they adopted the Tesla connector here in North America, then maybe I think there would be a chance for us to see some changes made. We have to remember that EV adoption is still very early on. I know a lot of us who are in the EV world and think and talk about electric vehicles day in and day out probably get lost in that. But EVs make up less than 10% of the cars on the road. It's still early. If a change like this for Tesla's plug to be adopted as a charging standard, at least here in North America, that it would have to happen within the next 3 years. If it doesn't happen in that time frame, then it's probably a dead end for the Tesla connector, or at least when it comes to non-Tesla vehicles. Okay, 2 more Tesla-centric news reports for you. The first of them being some interesting tidbits that I pulled from Tesla's semi-delivery event on December 1st. Like many of you, I'm sure, I streamed the delivery event for the Tesla Semi, and while it was packed full of a lot of great information, there are a few things that really stood out to me. First, I'll go over the points that were related to the Semi itself, and then I'll throw in the little tidbit about the rest, which there was definitely some nice nuggets of information in there. As with all Tesla vehicles, CEO Elon Musk touted the Semi's safety factor, but in this case it wasn't focused on crashworthiness, but instead how regenerative braking has the ability to make semi-trucks safer because of the ability to lessen the need for friction brakes on a downhill descent. Musk, joined by Dan Priestley, senior manager of the Tesla Semi program, pointed out that on a steep grade, the friction brakes on a traditional semi-truck can overheat and eventually fail, causing the truck to run away, which is why we see the runaway truck ramps off to the side of the highway that allows them to exit safely and come to a stop. But the Tesla Semi can use regenerative braking to not only recapture energy and put that back into the battery, but also eliminate the risk of those friction brakes overheating and failing. And that might be one of my favorite things about an electric semi-truck. No more runaways. They also revealed that the Semi is using the tri-motor powertrain from the Plaid vehicles. One motor on the front of the two drive axles is always connected and used for highway cruising. The other two electric motors are connected via clutches that engage when power is needed for acceleration or climbing a hill, but otherwise stay physically detached. They mentioned that this was a key factor in how the Semi was able to achieve a 2 kilowatt hour per mile efficiency, which also allowed for it to be able to travel 500 miles under a full 81,000 pound load. They showed a time-lapse video of such a trip to prove that it was real. Gotta push back against the haters, right? And that trip specifically showed that the driver of the Semi was going roughly 55 miles an hour. And that is a speed which I've found is much slower than most semi-trucks or semi-drivers choose to go. But hey, they did prove that a 500-mile trip could be achieved in real-world conditions with real-world traffic over a real-world course that includes climbing over Donner Pass and then, of course, coming back down the other side. The Semi is not short on power either. At one point, they emphasized that the Semi was accelerating up the mountain, passing a conventional semi-truck with ease due to it having 3 times the power of a traditional diesel tractor. Other major things to note are that the Semi has a 1,000-volt battery architecture and super fast megawatt charging, claiming that it can recharge from 0 to 80% in only 30 minutes. And here's where things started to get rather interesting. They revealed that the battery system, the architecture, that 1,000 volts, is something that Tesla is also going to use for the Cybertruck. So that is fascinating. And honestly, if that is true, that will make a big difference. They also talked about version 4 superchargers, which I won't get into too much, but those will be necessary to support the new charging infrastructure. So there's a lot to kind of wait on and see. And I think we'll learn a lot more about that when they end up starting deliveries of the Cybertruck next year. One thing I really love to see overall is how Tesla is incorporating their technology across vehicle platforms. Originally 5 years ago when the Semi was first revealed, the thought was that it was going to be a quad motor powertrain design using Model 3 motors. Well, now we've learned that they're using the Plaid powertrain that allows for the motors to be spun at a much faster RPM. This could be helpful for Tesla to maximize the low-end torque through a different gear set. And so that way, let's say if the Semi is going 80 miles an hour, the motors would be spinning at a similar rate to when the Plaid S or X are doing maybe 160 miles an hour. And I'm just pulling those numbers off the top of my head, out of thin air, but I think you get the point. Aside from that, obviously a big thing with any electric vehicle, but specifically with this Tesla Semi, is that the total cost of ownership for one of these is going to save fleet operators a ton of money. And ultimately, that is what companies are going to look at first and foremost. Not that the other features aren't important, but money talks. Aside from being super aerodynamic, kind of awesome looking, and that you can stand up fully inside the cab, I think money is going to be the big factor. Next, Tesla is working on a redesign of the Model 3, codenamed Project Highland. According to Reuters, one focus of the redesign is to reduce the number of components and complexity in the interior of the Model 3 while focusing on features that Tesla buyers value, including the display, according to people who asked not to be named because this revamp has not officially been announced. The revamped Model 3 could also see some changes to the exterior and powertrain performance. Will go into production at Tesla's factory in Shanghai and in Fremont, California. Tesla's Shanghai Gigafactory will put the redesigned Model 3 into production in the third quarter of 2023, according to the people inside the company. Tesla has absolutely pioneered the use of massive casting machines known as gigapresses, and these reduce cost and speed up production. They also have designed the structural battery pack that does away with more of the expensive modules for the Model Y. Elon Musk has said Tesla is looking to drive costs down through simplification and working on a smaller car platform that would be half the cost of the Model 3, but we really haven't heard a whole lot more about that. This approach to manufacturing is part of what has made Tesla the most profitable electric vehicle maker, while many rivals are still running at a loss. In the third quarter, Tesla made a profit of just over $9,500 for every vehicle sold, compared to roughly $1,300 for Toyota, according to disclosures by both companies. So this is something that I am not surprised to find out about. Ever since Tesla started changing the way the Model Y is built, I kind of figured it was only a matter of time before we saw similar processes trickle down to the Model 3. This is exciting, and honestly, I think it'll mean that the cost to build a Model 3 will decrease. Now, whether that translates into lower prices for buyers remains to be seen. Hopefully it will, but of course, at this point, this is all not supposed to be revealed yet, and Tesla hasn't indicated anything. Lastly, a sad story to end the news segment. Sono Motors has announced that they are ready to pull the plug on their Sion solar EV. The vehicle that I originally talked about during episode 125 has already more than 20,000 reservations and was looking to be one of the most affordable upcoming EVs, solar capability or not. Plans to produce this vehicle are now looking grim. During their Q3 earnings call, Sono announced that, quote, financial markets have experienced a negative downturn, with many tech companies losing up to 90% or more of their respective market cap, and shares in mobility tech companies have been hit particularly hard. As a result, financing our Sion program through equity has become increasingly challenging and dilutive. Raising money takes much longer than expected, since we failed to explain to investors why the Sion has the potential to become the world's first affordable solar electric vehicle and that there is a huge demand for it. End quote. The company says it needs 3,500 more orders, or more specifically, 3,500 fully paid orders in order to continue with the vehicle development and bring it into production. Without that funding, the company seems ready to pull the plug on the Sion project.
We failed. Okay? We failed to raise money, and maybe this is the end of the Project Sion.
That is from a released video on YouTube featuring the company's two co-founders admitting that they have failed in raising money to make the Sion happen. It is clear, and I'm sure you can hear it too, that the emotions are heavy and the silence in the room during the announcement is just deafening. So what Sono has done now is launched a 50-day campaign called Save Sion, through which they are trying one last time to keep people interested in the car and convince those who have already put their name down for one to stick with their reservation and actually buy the vehicle. And as I've mentioned before, I have been shocked with the value of one of these vehicles. Making cars is hard. Making EVs is harder, it would seem, and I really hope Sion will not follow other EV startups that got so close only to fail right before the finish line. So we'll see. Hopefully they will work it out to make it happen, because if not, the world will definitely miss out on what looks to be a very, very capable product. Okay, so that is all for the news this week, but stick around. I've got your answers to last week's question of the week and more right after this. It is time now to review the question of the week. Last week, we were talking about subscriptions for vehicle features inspired by the story of Mercedes or BMW reserving certain upgrades for regularly occurring payments. And the responses to this one were slightly mixed, but everyone seemed against the idea of a subscription, with 83% of you being okay paying for additional features, but with a one-time payment, not a subscription. And then the other 17% said absolutely not, one price at purchase and nothing else. And honestly, I agree with all of you. I feel like I want to own my car in its original configuration as well as any upgrades I choose to purchase. I do not want to pay on a monthly or annual basis for more power, heated seats, or really anything else. Just let me buy what I want, and let's leave it at that. So once again, a reminder to head over to patreon.com/EVresource for this week's question of the week. Is it a good move for Corvette to become its own brand? And I've also asked you all, if you have any questions, to go ahead and send them in and ask me, and I'll read them out on the podcast or include the audio file if you've recorded one. And while I'll try to answer your question, I definitely invite you all to respond to any submissions with your own answers or reactions as well. Let's really have some fun with this and make the podcast much more interactive. This week, Al from Bartlett, Illinois, wrote in a question related to planned obsolescence of products, asking, many manufacturers of objects have designed items with planned obsolescence in mind. Do you think electric car makers who keep claiming they designed to last forever are really doing this? Al, thanks so much for your question, and it's one that has really gotten me thinking. Nothing lasts forever, certainly, and even the best EV components are going to fail eventually. That being said, however, reliability is so much better with electric vehicles, and that is pushing automakers to get creative with how they engage with customers to keep them coming back. And I honestly think that's where the subscription model for features is coming from. I also think that manufacturers are more likely to focus on improving their products regularly to encourage owners to trade it in for the next best thing, similar to the way Apple does with the iPhone. Aside from that, I see software playing a much bigger role in the vehicle experience going forward, and if automakers can earn enough money from software or upgrades, I don't think they need to design their products to fail. But what do you all think? Definitely send in your response to Al. I'm curious to see if anybody agrees or disagrees. If you have a question or a response to anything you've heard on the podcast that you would like to be included in a future episode, please send it to me in one of two ways. You can either record a quick question using the voice recorder on your phone and then email that to me, or you can just email me in the traditional way. Both options should be sent to hello@ev-resource.com, and if you do choose to record the audio, please keep it to 90 seconds or less. Now, before we end the episode, I want to thank our Patreon supporters. Leading the pack at the director tier is Rajeev Narayan, who just received his EV Resource mug and sent me a photo of it. It looks great, Raj. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you as always. Thanks also to Christopher Lawrence and Andy Cooper at the executive producer tier, and Charles Hall, Eric Weber, and Alan Michael at the producer tier. Their support and yours helps make this show possible, and in return, they get lots of perks for their contribution. If you enjoy the podcast and feel like I have earned your support, and I stress earned on that, I'm not asking for a handout, maybe now it's time to look into joining our growing Patreon family. Check out the link in the show notes or go to patreon.com/EVresource for more details. If you haven't already subscribed to the EV Resource YouTube channel, don't miss out on that either. I've got some awesome things in the works that I absolutely know you'll love. And let's keep the conversation going on social media. You can find EV Resource on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And lastly, before I go, a few quick reminders. I have started to amass a collection of products and services and companies that I believe offer something beneficial. If you're new to Tesla ownership and feel a little overwhelmed with the tech and features, or maybe you just haven't been told all the cool things about your new vehicle, I would encourage you to look into spending time with an advisor from Driven. They have people all over the country that are ready to help you out, and I am actually looking into becoming one of them, or I've started that process. So head over to driven.com, and that is spelled DRIVYN, and search for an advisor near you. If you're interested in reserving an Aptera solar vehicle, I've got a referral link in the show notes that'll give you 30% off your reservation deposit. It is only a little bit, but hey, if you were going to reserve Aptera anyway, it helps me out too, so it's a win-win. If you're interested in solar for your home or business, Power Solar has you covered. With potentially $0 down, they can get you started with a solar system of your own and cut back on your electric bill, or help you cut back on your electric bill. Check out the link in the show notes for more information on that. I also am partnered with Ohmmu. They are selling the best lithium 12-volt batteries on the market. Traditional lead-acid batteries underperform and typically do not last but maybe a couple years before needing to be replaced. Ohmmu's batteries are the best performing 12-volt batteries on the market and far outlast anything that you could put in your car. I've got a referral link in the show notes for that as well, and if you use the code EVR at checkout, you'll get 5% off your order. And lastly, if you've ever thought about starting your own podcast, I use Buzzsprout for my hosting and publishing, and they make it so easy to upload, and each episode gets distributed out to all of the podcast platforms. I don't have to worry about it at all. So check out the link there in the show notes if you want to know more about the different options that Buzzsprout has to offer. So that is it. We've reached the end. Thank you so much for being with me, especially if you've made it this far, and I'll catch you next week.